Hi, this is Jerish. Welcome to Ekascloud. In this webinar, you will see changing Apache service port number and port forwarding in Firewalld. It is a continuation to the previous webinar. In that, I have explained what is Apache and how to configure Apache web server in Red Hat Enterprise Linux. But anyway, I'll again configure Apache from scratch and then we will see how to change the service port number of Apache. Apache is a web server software which you can install it on Linux or Windows. In this webinar, I am installing Apache on a Red Hat Enterprise Linux system. I'll be connecting to this Linux system. Then I'll configure Apache. I have already given a domain name to this server. It is with apache demo.jerish.net. Now I'll log into the system. And now I'll install Apache software. Since I have already explained about Apache in the previous webinar, I'll go a little faster. So the first step would be installing Apache software. Just by installing Apache software, this server will have a configuration file in /etc/httpd/conf/httpd.conf, and there will be some supplementary configuration files which will be under /etc/httpd/conf.d. Inside that, anything finishing with .conf is configuration file. Also, it will create the website default location, which is /var/www/html. This main configuration file will have a configuration pointing to this location. Now we will start and enable service. If I look into the configuration file, there will be a line called document root in /etc/httpd/conf/httpd.conf. That line points to /var/www/html. But Apache service will not be there. If I use systemctl status httpd, you can see the service is inactive dead and it's disabled. So the second step would be, after installing software, you have to start and enable service. Now we'll use systemctl start httpd and systemctl enable httpd. And now we will place a sample HTML document in the default website location. So I'll create a file called index.html in /var www.html. And I'll place this sample HTML code. The HTML code which I used is going to display the message as welcome, this is sample page. Now within the server which I am configuring, there will be Firewalld service running. So we need to allow firewall. I'll use firewall-cmd --add service equal to http --permanent. This will allow port number 80. And I'll reload to add it to the runtime. By doing all this configuration, now Apache is ready. So I have installed software, I have started and enabled service. I said just after installing software, these configuration files will get created, and these configuration files will by default have a configuration pointing to /var www.html. So in third step, I created a default index.html file with some sample code. Then I have allowed firewall. After running service, the Apache service runs on port number 80, and by allowing firewall, you are also allowing port number 80, which means if anyone from internet tried to connect using their client browser, by default the browser tried to establish a session to port number 80. So the incoming traffic, when it comes to this server, firewall will check that, and since the firewall rule is allowed for port number 80, then it will allow to reach service port number 80. So now if I try to access the Apache service, I'll be able to access. So I'll use the name apache demo.jerish.net, and you can see the message welcome, this is a sample page. By default, like I said, the client browser sends request to port number 80. I have also allowed firewall for port number 80, and the service is also running on port number 80. Like I said, the aim of this webinar is to change the service port number. So I'm going to change the service port number of Apache from port number 80 to 800. Now if you check the status of Apache, you can see it is listening on port number 80. We have not did any configuration about this, but by default, just after installing software and running the service, Apache runs on port number 80. It is there in the main configuration file. So if I open the main configuration file, there will be a line with a line starting with listen. You can see it's configured as port number 80 because the default configuration is configured as listening on port number 80. Apache listens on port number 80. Now for this demo, I'll be changing the service port number from 80 to 800. It's very simple. Just change the number from 80 to any other number of your choice. I'm changing to port number 800 and I'll save. Normally when we do any configuration changes in Linux, you need to restart the service. But now if you restart the service Apache, it's not going to immediately change your service port number to 800 because the Linux server which I am using is running with SE Linux in enforcing mode. I'll show you. So if I use systemctl restart httpd, you can see it's going to get failed. So if you want to be more secure, you have to manage SE Linux by doing port labeling. But for this webinar, I'll just temporarily disable, or I'll put it in permissive mode for SE Linux. So I'll configure as permissive. So I'll say set enforce 0. Okay. By setting set enforce to 0, your SE Linux mode changed from enforcing to permissive. Now I'll restart Apache. By doing this, your Apache service port number changed from the default port number 80 to 800. Now if you again use the status command, earlier we saw that it was listening for port number 80, but now we can see it's listening on port number 800, which means if you try accessing the website now, you will not be able to access, because like I said already, by default the browser sends the request to port number 80. So the request connects to port number 80. Firewall also allows port number 80, but the service is not running on port number 80. We changed from 80 to 800. So what has to be done is you need to allow firewall for port number 80, and you also have to ask your clients to access with port number 80. It can be configured for some internal application, not for public websites. So now I'll allow firewall. I'll open port number 80 on firewall D by using firewall-cmd -add port equal to 800/TCP, and I'll add the rule to the permanent, and I'll reload to add it to the runtime. By doing this, we have already changed the service port number to 800. We have also allowed firewall to listen on port number 800. Now we can use our client browser. Still you cannot access with port number 80. Now you can access with port number 800. So to access with port number 800, so you have to just use :800 at the end of your URL or your IP address. Right. So now we can again access the page. So client sends the request on port number 800. Firewall is allowed on port number 800. We have also changed the service port number to 800, so we are able to access the page. Now it's possible to do a port forwarding. If you don't want to expose your service port number to internet clients, if it is a public website, you can do port forwarding. You can do the port forwarding on your edge routers or firewall. You can also do it within your operating system's firewall D. So let the service run on port number 800. What I'll do is I'll try accessing the website with port number 80. So if I have to add a rule in the firewall saying that if anybody sends a request to port number 80, it has to be forwarded to port number 800. Right. So now, because I have not added any port forwarding rule, if you just simply access the page, it's not going to be accessible. So I'll add a port forwarding rule in Firewalld. If any request comes to port number 80, then it will be forwarding it to port number 800. The meaning of this command is, so if the request comes for port number 80 TCP, it has to forward it to port number 800 because our service listens on port number 800. I'll add this rule and then I'll reload to take it to the runtime. By doing this, now you can again access the Apache service on port number 80. So I have explained how to change the service port number of Apache from the default port number 80 to 800, and also I have explained how to do a port forwarding in Firewalld if the internet client's access with the port number and if it need to be forwarded to a different port number. That's it for today. In our upcoming webinar, we will see how to configure virtual hosting within Apache.